Hello, all, and welcome to Bennis Stories, a series of interviews with people who knew, loved, were influenced by, worked with, wrote with, were students and mentees of Warren Bennis. This is Kate Bennis, Warren's daughter. This series is created for the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute at the University of Cincinnati's Lindner College of Business. My partner in this endeavor is Betsy Myers. Betsy was a dear friend and colleague of Dad's, worked with him at the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government as its executive director. She has also been a senior advisor to both President Clinton and President Obama, and is a senior advisor to the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute. Today, Betsy and I are delighted to welcome Joan Goldsmith. As you'll hear, Joan first met Dad when she married Peter McGregor, Doug McGregor's son. Now, Doug had been the president of Antioch College when Dad was there and brought Dad with him to MIT when he went there, and that's where Dad got his PhD and really started the whole growth into becoming somebody interested in groups and leadership. And Joan personally has been in my life as a mentor and a friend and a hero. She invited me years ago to participate in one of her women's leadership programs. And honestly, the shifts that occurred in that group still ripple through every realm of my life. She wrote the workbook, Learning to Lead with Dad, based on his book on becoming a leader. She has also written many books with her husband and mediation expert, Ken Cloak, who we also interview, so keep an eye out for that. Joan has been an organizational consultant, coach, and educator for the past 35 years, specializing in leadership development, organizational change, conflict resolution, and team building. Joan has authored several books on leadership, including with Warren Bennis, Learning to Lead, and the soon-to-be-published Women Leaders at the Grassroots, 9 Stories and 9 Strategies. She is founder of Cambridge College, former member of the faculties of Harvard University, UCLA, Antioch University, and holds a Master's of Arts in Social Sciences and a doctorate in Humane Letters. Welcome, Joan. All right, Joan, so you were about to tell a story.
Well, you wanted to know when I met Warren Bennis.
Yeah.
And it was in 1964. And I think, Kate, you were either born then or your mom, Clary, was pregnant with you. And the way I met him was that I had recently married the son of Douglas McGregor. I married Peter McGregor, and Douglas was Warren's mentor. Doug had just died, and Peter and I were going to visit his mom, Carolyn McGregor, who Warren and Carolyn published a series of Doug McGregor's essays. They edited them and published them. That should be in the University of Cincinnati library, that book. It's fantastic. It's all the heart of Douglas McGregor, who really was the father of the work we're going to discuss today. So Peter and I were on our way we're at the house in Acton, Massachusetts, in the driveway, just pulled up to be with Carolyn and to explain to her how we were leaving our doctoral programs at the University of Chicago to go save the world. And who pulls up in a yellow convertible but Warren Bennis, hair blowing in the wind, and with him Clary Bennis, his beautiful wife. That's how we met. And it turns out that Warren had been at Antioch College on the GI Bill after he served as one of the youngest lieutenants in the European theater during World War II. And he and McGregor was president of Antioch then. I went to Antioch in 1959, later than Warren, and was very interested in McGregor's work. He came to visit the campus. I asked him if he'd have lunch with me. He did, just me and Doug. So I met him before I fell in love with his son. And after he died, his son and I married and lived together in our marriage for 5 years. And Warren mentored us. As usual, he, throughout his career, kept his eyes open for who might have something to offer him and someone to offer the world. and he supported talent. All three of us, Kate, Betsy, and Joan, were recipients of this wonderful gift of being supported and loved. When Warren and Cleary lived in Boston, they hired Peter to join a consulting firm that Warren had founded. I don't know if you know about OSTI, but this was one of the first organizational consulting firms in the country. Warren Bennis, Fred Wiseman, who was a filmmaker who had just won an award for documentary film, Titicut Follies, exposing the criminality in the mental hospitals. And Warren had funded that film and supported that film.
Freddie's got a film out right now. I just read about it in the New York Times. We should interview Freddie. Oh my gosh.
Yes. And I want to mention another funding of your mom's. Your father supported me in my work against the war in Vietnam in those years. And in 1907, and when he was at the University of Buffalo as provost, he invited me several times to speak to faculty and students about the war and why we need to oppose it. Because I was teaching about that all over before I went to join the faculty at Harvard. I met a man named Jason Epstein, who was the chief editor at Random House, invited him to go to lunch with me, showed him the Vietnam curriculum, and asked him to publish it. He said, well, I can't publish it, but my wife, Barbara Epstein, and her partner, Bob Silvers, they're starting a little magazine in New York, and they might publish it. It's called the New York Review of Books. But so I met with them. They wanted to publish it. They did publish it with a $600 loan to print the first run of the book. And guess who wrote the $600 check? Cleary Bennis. And Warren was so supportive of those of us opposing the war and also working for civil rights that he refused at the University of Buffalo in his role as provost to refuse the command of the president, Meyerson, to bring in troops and the National Guard to arrest the students protesting the war. He then went to Cincinnati and he took a private university and created it public to make it available for people who couldn't afford steep tuition and who needed to be in a public university where they could get fellowship. Early 1970s, that was the same time I was founding the Institute of Open Education in Cambridge, which became Cambridge College. And our first scholarship was for African American students who were going to be teachers or who were teachers in poor Black neighborhoods in Boston. This was before the National Guard had to integrate the public schools in Boston. And your dad supported me in creating that institute. He went on the board of Antioch University so that our institute could become an Antioch Graduate Center. And he never failed and never gave up his commitment to public education for people of color and people who did not have the funds to get higher education. So when I think now about the students and faculty at the University of Cincinnati, I think about how can they just have discussions, reach out to people who are different from them, and share their values, because that's what Warren stood for. And I just want to say, because one of the questions you asked me to think about is, what could Warren contribute now in our current time? The three women who were attacked in Congress as presidents of Harvard, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania for the controversial demonstrations and attacks on campus regarding the war in the Middle East. Warren would have supported them in coaching them and advising them instead of dealing with statements to Congress. They should have organized what he called great groups across campus so that everyone could discuss their politics, their history, their identities. His book, Great Groups, is a book that must be in the library at Cincinnati, because Warren had studied after the war at the Tavistock Institute, which was famous for creating small groups, small group discussion, and democratic solutions. And before I met Warren, I had gone to the University of Chicago with a fellowship for a doctorate in John Dewey education and in great groups. And I studied at Tavistock Institute. And Warren and I worked a lot together over the years on creating group discussions, group problem solving, and democratic decision making. So that needs to be reborn. And I just want to mention one thing as a follow-up to my book with him, and I want to mention that later. I wrote a book that came out in 2022 called Women Leaders at the Grassroots, 9 Stories and 9 Strategies. And in the introduction, I quote, Warren Bennis, before his death in 2014, he observed on May 17th, 2014 to me. He said, now listen very carefully to this, Joan. It's important. The only competitive advantage of any world power is this point. It is women's leaders. He understood the power of women as leaders and the need to support women leaders to make the world work. And when he talked about leadership, he also told a wonderful story that he often gave in speeches he made, and told it and gave me permission to use it in our book. Here's the story. He learned his greatest leadership lessons when he commanded combat troops during World War II as one of the youngest U.S. lieutenants in the European theater. He spoke of a wise comment made by a woman in a lecture to staff at a corporation in Silicon Valley. This woman from the manufacturing plant spoke about her understanding of the qualities of women leaders. Now, before I read you what she said, I want to mention to you, Warren never gave up on coaching leaders, people who were in high positions of power in Silicon Valley, in manufacturing plants, in the industrial sector. And he today would be advising his pal, Howard Schultz, to not punish Starbucks workers for organizing the labor union, but in fact, find out why they need a union. What do they want from the union? Ask questions, get discussions going, and create a corporate-wide group of leaders to come up with plans for restructuring Starbucks. Here's what the woman said. Quote, I have a deaf daughter, so I learned American Sign Language and ASL. This is the sign for male leadership. She held out her hands as if she were holding on to reins of a horse or restraining something. She went on, quote, this is the ASL sign for women who lead. She cradled her arms and rocked them back and forth the way a parent might nurture a child.
Wow.
That says it. That was Warren's approach to leadership.
I never heard that, Joan. That is, wow. What? No.
And that grew from Doug McGregor's distinctions between theory X and theory Y, in which he created a model for corporate leadership that allowed people to nurture each other and to create dialogue. We need that today. We need it in the Middle East. We need it in the corporate sector. And I don't know if both of you or anybody knows this story, but Warren and his wife, then Grace Gabe, and my husband and I, Ken Cloak and I, were planning to have dinner. And it was the night that the Supreme Court gave the presidency to George W. Bush. And Warren and Grace were late for dinner. They were never late. We were always the ones Ken and I were a little late. Anyway, we waited and waited. Finally, they came in. Why were they late? Al Gore had called Warren personally. What should I do in response to the Supreme Court decision? And Warren said, what I recommend to you is you devote the next 4 years and maybe beyond to redesigning the election process for the presidency. And we know from January 6th, 2020, why it was needed. We know from the attack on the Capitol and almost the destruction of democracy. He was very much following the competencies of leadership that he described in his book on becoming a leader, and that he asked me to work on and develop in the follow-on book, Learning to Lead, a workbook on becoming a leader. He wrote on becoming a leader in '89, and I wrote with him 2009, Learning to Lead, because I had been doing a lot of work in teaching his theories, his values of leadership all over the world. So his competencies of leadership, I'd just like to take a minute and mention them because they are outlined in each chapter of our book, Learning to Lead. And in that book are activities that faculty and students can use in their families, in their communities, and certainly at the Bennis Institute in Cincinnati. The first one is mastering the context. And what Warren meant was always not just being aware of the big picture, but mastering it, being on top of it, understanding it. If he were alive today, he would be working with President Biden in mastering the many, many centuries of history in the Middle East that's driving the war there. And he would be advising him on how to speak to that context, as Jimmy Carter did and as Bill Clinton did, to create peace accords and two-state solution. The second competency, and this is what I think the most important one, having been a family therapist and having taught family therapy to teachers at Harvard, mastering knowing yourself is competency 2. And Warren was a master in keeping track of himself, always taking his pulse. If you have the book, Still Surprised, that he wrote, his biography, you'll note he describes in it how he felt when he had his heart attack in London and at the Claridge's Hotel. He was in touch with what was going on with him. And I met with him for lunch in London after he started living at Windsor Castle to recover. And he was very aware of how he had made a decision as president of the University of Cincinnati that was denying himself, denying his heart, and caused a heart attack. I'll tell you the story. He describes in this book a conversation he had with a man, a wonderful, wonderful man who had been the dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Paul Ylvisaker. Paul and his associate dean, Blenda Wilson, were very close friends of mine and supported creating Cambridge College. And Paul was a white man, I don't know, Norwegian heritage. Blenda was a Black woman from New Jersey. And she had been a Head Start teacher, and he brought her in as a Harvard dean. Paul was listening to Warren in Cincinnati giving a speech. And when it was over, they were having dinner together. And Paul said, "Warren, do you love the University of Cincinnati?" You know the story. And Warren realized he did not love it. He was doing it out of stress, out of something he believed in, taking it public, in making it available to people all over the state. But he didn't love it. He was denying himself, and that caused the heart attack. So in my work in 1990, with Warren's support and encouragement, I started a program called Women Leaders, Creating Ourselves at the Crossroads. It was a 5-day session and followed by coaching sessions. 4 cities in the United States, and Kate was part of one of them in Boston, and 6 international sites: Tokyo, Zimbabwe, Amsterdam, in Scotland, etc. And I always start with knowing yourself. I usually ask the women just to introduce yourself to the rest of the group. Tell us about your name. My name, Joan Goldsmith, has remained Joan Goldsmith through 2 marriages, because I learned that my identity from that childhood is still with me and important to me. And I knew from my work with Warren that that was a thread through my life, just as he has a picture in his book, Still Surprised, of him with his twin brothers. And I'll tell you, he knew, and he was aware of it, being the younger brother of twin brothers and managing that relationship enabled him to manage relationships with many, many men who were creative and who enabled the world to be a better place. The Osti firm, I just want to tell you, my sisters, the Osti firm was Warren. It was, as I said, Fred Wiseman. It was a man named Noel Day, who was the only Black city council member in Boston in 1970, when the schools were still segregated. And he was a member of that firm, and Warren fought to have him be a member of that firm.
Wait, I'm sorry, he was in Cincinnati or Boston? He was in Cincinnati or Cambridge or Boston?
In Cambridge. In Cambridge.
Okay.
Yeah. This was before he went to Cincinnati. So maybe it was late 60s. When did he go to Cincinnati? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I think 70 or 71. 71.
Yeah. So it was just before. But they worked with a lot of corporations to try to make them more diverse. The third competency is creating a powerful vision. If I were teaching at the University of Cincinnati in the Warren Bennis Institute, what I would want each person to do would be to read his biography, to study the way he followed his vision. He always created a vision of what was next, what should happen, where should it be. That's why he went to Davos, to the conferences with corporate leaders worldwide, to advise them on corporate structures that would serve people who were disadvantaged, and those people could then serve to save the climate, save health, and create a better world. He always had a vision of how the world should be, and that's why he created that vision, and then he kept it alive. He followed it. So the fourth competency is communicating with meaning. And Warren communicated with wonderful stories, talked about his own life. There was one wonderful communication with meaning that he talks about in the book, and you probably know about it, but I just want to mention it because it was really fun, and I happen to have been part of it. I had introduced Warren to a man named Werner Erhard, who had founded the EST organization, the EST training. Werner had asked me to help him complete the past with the whole organization worldwide and create EST anew into Landmark. And I introduced them because I thought Warren could be the one to really give Werner a vision, status, and a way to create this new organization. So Werner asked Warren to give a lecture to all the staff in San Francisco. Maybe, I don't know, 500 people in the San Francisco area staff. People were flown in, and then it was broadcast. I don't know what the technology was, but it was broadcast to staff in London, all over the world. So Warren had a secret plan. Werner had taken a year off working for EST just before I met him, when he had created the Hunger Project to end world hunger and the community workshop to get away from the me to save poor communities and gang kids. And those two initiatives are why I went to work for him, because those were my values. So he'd taken the year off to learn to do race car driving, Formula One race car driving, to build a team and learn how this team could help him race a car. Never knew how, but he tried it, he did it, and then he reported out on team building, and Warren helped him a lot with that, with teams. So for Warren's speech, he comes out in a very corporate suit and tie, very Ivy League tie and jacket, and looking very corporate and the guru. And Werner introduces him, and Warren says, "Oh, just a minute, I'd like to get to be more comfortable." Takes off his jacket, opens his tie, takes off his shirt, and he's wearing Werner's race car driving outfit. He's wearing a Formula One race course outfit. And he loved it. He laughed. Everybody laughed. Werner got it. Werner got it. You got to have a sense of humor about yourself and support the staff. And then Warren went from there to really empower staff members in a very, very important way that did enable that organization and those people who were committed to that philosophy and that way of rebuilding and refining yourself to do it. And Warren and Cleary had both done the EST training at my command in London. And it made a big difference in their lives. So what the hell? That's about communicating with meaning. Warren was willing to make an asshole of himself to communicate with meaning to people who were committed to self-discovery, who were committed to transformation. And it worked. And then there's maintaining trust through integrity. And I have to say that in my experience in working with Warren in some of the corporate sectors where he was consulting, some of the work we did together. He was always committed to enabling corporate leaders to have integrity. And Warren was published often by Josie Bass Wiley Publishers. And Ken and I wrote a book called The End of Management and the Rise of Organizational Democracy, which Charles Handy proposed in Germany to be the best book on leadership, and it was selected. It's all based on Warren's and Doug McGregor's philosophy of leadership and way organizations should work. And Warren, at an event, Peter Drucker was there, the man who created management, the theory of management. And Warren introduced us and told him about our book. And Drucker said, well, it's about time. But that was Warren's integrity. It wasn't, it's his ideas. It's our work, our ideas. He never turned away from recommending our books be published. He recommended us to teach at the Cape Cod Institute when he decided not to do it anymore, to stand in his stead. He was very, very generous. But his integrity, his willingness to give away his power, his access, and certainly his endorsement was very, very generous. And the final competency that he defined is so wonderful. Realizing intention through action. Kneel it to the fucking ground. Make it happen. He was committed at Cincinnati, obviously, to bring that school into the state system, no matter what it took, with his health, with his time with you, Kate, and your brothers, with his ability to meet his own health needs. He was committed to realizing his intention. And he did that throughout his life. Up until 2014, till his last years, he was committed at a University of Southern California to make that private, mostly serving upper-class students school available to working class kids in LA, and to be responsible for the community where it was located. It was located in a Black, poor community. It is. And he was committed to making that school be responsible to that community. So those are his competencies that meant a lot to me, and he lived them, so his life demonstrates it. I want to say one more thing about learning to lead as well as on becoming a leader. Warren gave both books away. He insisted on bibliographies, not just a page or two, but complete, detailed bibliographies of every possible name, every possible resource that anyone wanting to have access to leadership to find and build. And in learning to lead, just want to mention one more thing. There was a student of his, Andrew Willems, Wilhelms. We hired him under Warren's tutelage to create a selective bibliography of resources on leadership. And this is, let's see, how many pages is it? It is over 20 pages of people that he loved and respected. He includes controversial books in here that Warren wanted in. Hannah Arendt's book, The Origin of Totalitarianism. Tony Athos, who was a good friend of mine, and I had him teach. Tony Athos left Harvard Business School professorship because he was gay and he was taking abuse. And I hired him often to speak at my clients and to speak openly about being gay. Hannah Arendt, I asked her to speak at the University of Chicago. And I want to mention, and then I'll stop. I just want to mention that this selective bibliography should be assigned reading at the University of Cincinnati to every student who wants to be involved in leadership. And in the midst of the civil rights and anti-war movement, 665 at the University of Chicago, I was very active, and a group of us organized a seminar, volunteer seminar, no course credit, just meetings, called Hawk and the Dove, based on a lot of our work on teams and groups and Warren's work on groups, although I didn't know of his work in those days. And the Hawk and the Dove were to invite people against the war in Vietnam and needing people who felt we needed to be in the war in Vietnam. And they would come the same day and discuss. Hannah Arendt agreed to come. She refused to talk. She said, "You are creating so much upheaval in this country. Nazism will follow. It's like Germany when Hitler came to power." She was frightened. She had experienced Hitler. She was very frightened. She said, "I'm frightened. I don't want to be here." And she walked out. I learned a lesson from that I apply now when I think about what's going on in the Middle East. And I think what Warren would have done then and would have to do now would be to give people a chance to talk about their fears, their loss, their pain, and to find ways to reach out to each other to heal themselves and to heal each other. He was a master at healing. He healed himself. He certainly came back physically from the heart attack. He created a wonderful home in Aspen for family and to be part of the Aspen Institute in the mountains in the countryside. And he recreated himself often at USC to be an honored professor, but much more a kind of humble, honest, and generous faculty member. Ask me questions or see if there's anything else I can offer you.
Oh, Joan, wow. Thank you so much. I just, what a gift to hear all these stories. And thank you for really reaching back and looking at making sense of things, because it's hard to do that. It's just your life. You just lived it. So to go back and really think about what are the stories to tell is just beautiful. Thank you. I have tons of questions. Betsy, do you have questions?
Well, I was going to say that's really what we want to capture. Oh my God, there's so much richness in your stories, Joan. My gosh. That's what the whole purpose of doing these connecting people like you who really knew him to these stories so that we don't ever lose it. So this was incredible.
Guess who I learned about stories from?
Warren.
Warren Bennis. He was a master at telling them.
So I just had a question. What was it like writing a book with Warren? Really special.
Went ahead and wrote the damn book. Had him go through it. He made changes. I also worked a lot out of On Becoming a Leader. He had a contract from the publishers of On Becoming a Leader to write a workbook. And he said, since I was doing that, teaching it, I should write the workbook. However, it was his philosophy, it was his input. And I asked him what were important lessons and stories. And there was one, we wrote together the introduction, the preface. Can I just read you that last paragraph? Because he wrote this. While history may not demand that we express these levels of leadership, we are certain that each of us has the capacity to become a leader in our own life. In light of this truth, we offer you an opportunity for learning and knowledge with which you can discover your innate leadership talents, hone your blunted or undiscovered skills, and express yourself as the successful leader you can be. We humbly offer the wisdom we have gleaned from others, and we hope that you will value the process as much as we have enjoyed creating it. We wish you well on your journey. And I want to tell you that after I met Ken, we were both 45 years old, 1986. And Ken was one of the founders worldwide of mediation. He had been a judge, he'd been a lawyer, he was a mediator par excellence. Warren was willing to add another competency, which Ken suggested, which was the competency of resolving conflicts through mediation. He came up with those competencies in 87, and this is 15 years later when he accepted Ken's work in the 1990s in mediation as an added piece. So that was great. And he and I both loved the New York reporter Anna Quinlan, who had a column, and he showed me this column and said, I think this would be a good introduction to the first chapter in the book that kind of introduces it, A Lifetime of Learning to Lead. And can I read you this quote from her?
Sure.
She says, this is what she wrote in a speech to graduate at Wellesley College in 2002. This is an all-girls school in those days. You better have you, the real you, the authentic, examined self, not some patchwork collection of affectations and expectations, mores and mannerisms, some treadmill set to the prevailing speed of universal acceptability, the tyranny of homogeneity. Whether the homogeneity of the straight world of the suits or the spiky world of the avant-garde, ... You are only real if you can see yourself clear and true in the mirror of your soul and smile upon the reflection. Samuel Butler, this is the biographer, ancient biographer, once said, quote, life is like playing a violin solo in public and learning the instrument as one goes on. That sounds terrifying, doesn't it? And difficult too. But that way lies music. Look in the mirror. Who is that woman? She is the work of your life. She is the greatest glory too. Pick up your violin, lift your blow, and play. Play your heart out. And certainly the violinist who Warren married, Grace Gabe, in their later years, would certainly agree with that. And I say in the intro after that to this chapter, leadership can be learned by any of us, no matter our age. And it may be that a public university could offer leadership for elderly people. I created a program for women called A Woman's Renaissance for women over 50, because that's often when women come into their own.
I love that.
I can attest to that.
Yeah. Yes. We're both. Yes.
Yes.
Say more about that class. And are you still teaching it, or was that something you did in the past?
I've been thinking of reviving it. I'll let you know, Betsy.
Yeah, I do, because we have a lot of people who would be interested.
Yeah. No, mostly I've been teaching at Pepperdine University Law School, Ken and I, resolving conflicts in organizations, and on Zoom during COVID. And we're starting to get invitations to travel to Beijing and Tokyo and to do some teaching internationally. And we may do that we'll see.
Yeah.
We're both 82 and thinking about, do we want to get on another airplane?
Yeah. So say more about that program.
It was a workshop of 5 full days and then coaching sessions. And the days had to do with roots, key turning points. I like the idea of turning points that got you to where you are now at 50 plus. And then what lies ahead?
Yes.
What's your vision, as Warren talked about? What's your hope? What do you want to come from this? Kate, I don't know if you remember this, but your dad was dying. He was in the emergency room at the hospital near here. And you sent me a text. Dad's in the hospital in the emergency room and he wants to see you. Can you come by? And it turned out I was at my dermatologist 2 blocks away. So I went. So this is probably a few months before he died. He looked at me and he said, Joan, when are we going to write my autobiography? He was thinking that at, how old was he when he died?
89.
89, yeah. He was thinking at almost 90 of an autobiography, another one.
I remember him saying when he was very ill, you know, the next book, well, no, not the next book I want to write, the book after. So I have a next book I'm going to write, which is a really big book, but then there's a book after that. And I was like, wow, this is the most optimistic human being I've ever in my life met.
Yes. Well, I know a number of women who are like me. I mean, 82, I got a lot going on. Kate, you're not the only one interested in your father. The book that I'm about doing the final edit for, and I'll send you both the preface when it's done. It's called Searching for Daddy and Finding Myself, a biography and a memoir. My father, I'll tell you just one item about my dad. You may know that the UAW strike that just settled, United Auto Workers strike, one of the things they were negotiating was a cost of living increase every year, guaranteed. It had been in the contract since 1948. Who got it into that contract? My father. My father was a union leader in the 30s and 40s. He led the Civil Rights Congress. He worked very hard against lynching. And then he had to go underground because of McCarthyism and became a businessman in Louisville, Kentucky. And I grew up going to Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. I was 10 years old when we moved from Manhattan to Louisville. But what I wanted to say about Daddy was he never gave up. He moved to California. He had been fired from the New York Times, in 1936 for organizing the union. He always wanted to be a newspaper man. He became president of the Los Angeles Drama Critics Circle. He was a theater and film critic. He had dialogues with Tennessee Williams, Eugene Ionesco, with the theater critics. He was president of the Circle and he gave an honorary theater critic award, his organization, to the brothers who wrote a play about the war, opposing the war in Vietnam, and the one brother was in prison. He got the award posthumously. Anyway, my dad was somebody who I admired, and Warren knew that, but they were on different tracks.
What do you mean different tracks?
Warren was living in a world of writing books, and my father also wrote a lot, articles and pamphlets, but Warren was more in the academic world and honored by USC and Harvard and Cincinnati, and Daddy was honored by other playwrights and union CIO. He worked for John L. Lewis. So they just were playing in different fields. They weren't on different tracks. They were playing in different fields.
First of all, I'm going to get my kids learning to lead for Christmas. I think both of them would really love that right now. And that sounds like, Betsy, a great book for first year students at UC. That book could be the textbook. I mean, why not? It just feels like Joan's already written the textbook. And after speaking with Ken, we were thinking of conflict resolution. My God, you cannot be a leader if you can't bring people together.
It's dedicated to her and her brothers. The leaders of our future, may you realize your dreams, is what he says.
Yeah.
In the dedication.
Oh, the OSTI firm. Can you spell that? I never heard
OSTI, Organization for System Transformation and Integration, something like that.
Huh. I never heard of it, and that's fascinating to me. I'm going to look into that.
Well, Betsy, if you email me your address, I'll email you my women's leaders book, because it's full of Warren.
Oh, I would love, because that's my background. That's my expertise, is on women's leadership. Yeah.
Let's make it an exchange. You send it to me.
I have one book, but it's not on women. It's called Take the Lead. And it's been out like 12 years now. And it's about how leadership creates a feeling. And Warren wrote the afterword, and David Jordan wrote the foreword. And I have Warren's voice because he was willing to do the audio for me. And the whole reason I even wrote my book was because Warren was championing me. I didn't feel like I was an author, and he was like, no, you have a lot to say. I wrote a lot about him in my book as well. But my work in my life has been about women's leadership. And I worked in the Clinton administration, and I ran the Office for Women Business Owners. And then I went to the White House with President Clinton and ran his Office for Women, which is the only president that's had an Office for Women, by the way.
Great. Good for you. Good for you.
And it was on the president's staff. It wasn't like just the First Lady's initiative. It was actually on his team, which we worked closely with the First Lady, but it was actually on his team.
That makes a huge difference. Well, you and I can do some exchanges. I'll email you description of my women's leaders program, Creating Ourselves at the Crossroads, and some material from that too.
No, because I really think I'm 63, and I just see a lot of women in my age group are struggling with what's next. I had a daughter late, and so she's just graduating college now at 21. And I was thinking, Kate, you and I had babies the same. You were like 42 when you had Anya.
Yeah, I was 40 with Luke and 42 with Anya.
Because when Anya graduates college, you'll be my age. I'll be 64 in the summer. My daughter graduates in May. I'm like, what's next? We have a lot more life. I think this is such an important conversation.
Very important.
And that women are hungry, and you're an empty nester, and you all of a sudden it's, now what? What's next?
Right.
And you're feeling like, I'm getting older, but I have a lot of years left. And what do I? So I think that this could be something, almost part of the Institute, but almost separate.
Great.
Like, if I could do nothing with life going forward, it'd be working with this age group. Of like, you have
I like to support you. And look, both of you are leading full professional lives, Kate and you, Betsy. Even though you've got kids, you've got family. Empty nest, I just hate that phrase.
I know.
First of all, it's never empty.
No, it's not.
I got a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old when I met Ken, and they became my stepkids. I have 6 grandkids, and screw it. When we're in North Idaho in our cabin, and our 4 grandkids are in their cabin down the road, first thing they say is, Grandma, can we come stay with you? Sure, you can come on Sunday at 2:00, because I write every morning from 9 until 1, and nobody comes to the house.
You know what, Joan? I want to ask you, actually, as a woman, because you have been so disciplined, you and Ken, how do you keep your professional integrity and work flowing no matter what? Can you just tell us a little bit about the nuts and bolts of your life? I don't know if this is even going to make it into the podcast, but man, do I want to know.
When Ken is writing, we both just protect the morning, right? I get up first. I swim at 7:30 in the morning, laps in a freezing cold backyard lap pool. This morning it was really bad. Then I shower and dress, fix breakfast. After breakfast, which is usually 9:30, I go to my writing area. He goes to his. We both have sacred rooms. He has an office. I'm upstairs talking to you from my office. We have a staff assistant, a personal assistant 2 days a week, she comes, she tells the gardener to adjust the water pressure. She tells the bank Ken can't find his arbitration check. He gives it all to me. Joan, can you? And I just write her a note and go write. I'm not fucking doing it. Okay? So that's one thing. As women, we have to set limits, and very important. And then
I remember you saying you had a wife, that
she's our wife.
Soul is your wife, right?
Soul's our
She's
wife.
The wife of the family.
And she's been with us. She was with me before I met Ken, about 40 years, and she handles all that. Now, with professional requests, we often will say, we can Zoom. This is unusual that I'm Zooming with you this early in the morning, because we usually say after 1, something like that. Saturday, we're going to a birthday party at 2 p.m. from a man who's 90 years old. Usually we say, gosh, we'd love to, but we can't be with people. This man was the only African-American head of a department in LA County in 1982. Only, and every white department head got a new car every year. He did not. His white staff was earning more money than he was. He put out an RFP. I brought my management consulting firm that I was with to bid on it. I met with him for 5 minutes and I had the contract, $260,000 contract to restructure his organization. We're going to an all-black birthday party for a 90-year-old. We're going because at this point in time, it's important for us to show up.
Yes.
Okay. But I have to tell you that we don't say yes to everything anymore. And we manage it so that our priorities are protected.
Dad was really disciplined too.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I do think that it's easier generally for men to just do that. Just say, bye, I'm going to write or whatever. There is definitely a pull for women.
Yes.
What I have to do is I have to leave our house and I have to come to my office.
Yes.
If I'm in the house, even with the door shut in my office, it's like the guest room office, forget it. I have a big sign that says, do not disturb. I'm busy. It's like,
no. Yeah. Well, you see, they're not living with us. No matter what, we talk to our son and daughter every Sunday, 12:30 and 1:30. 12:30 after writing.
After.
She's a doctor. She's a physician. He's got a business he runs. So what? That's when we're available.
Yeah. Yeah. Sacred time. Sacred time and sacred space.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Betsy, is there anything else you want to ask Joan?
Oh my God, there's so much. It's funny because Joan, we were just last week in a meeting with the University of Cincinnati dean and the woman Donna, who's running the institute right now, and me and Kate talking about what the curriculum should look like. What is unique? There's a million leadership centers out there. So we keep saying, what is unique and special about Warren? And so combing that out so that really this program is not just for the students at U Cincinnati, but also for executive programming as well. That people that will come to be steeped in the Warren Bennis teachings.
The competencies of leadership should be the structure of a curriculum. And they don't have to do what's in Learning to Lead or on Becoming a Leader or Women Leaders or Still Surprised. They can put anything they want in that structure. It will bring out the talents, the skills, the competencies of the students and the executives who are going to come for special classes and pay a lot of money, A, and B, it's based on two greats in American academia, Warren Bennis, Douglas McGregor. And let me say one other thing about Doug and Warren. They were both at MIT. And at MIT, there was a division created with Doug by a man named Kurt Lewin, who escaped the Nazis and came to MIT and created a division dedicated to democracy. And at that also was there, and Doug insisted Warren come, and they insisted they admit him. The Adornos were there. They did the definitive research on the authoritarian personality, which should be assigned reading now, given the 2024 election. The history that is Charles Handy's work, the history that is recognized is there, is a great legacy. It's already ready. It doesn't have to be recreated.
That's what's so amazing about talking to people like you and Ken and others. It doesn't need to be recreated.
No.
So Betsy, can you tell Joan, all of the undergraduates will have some kind of leadership course, right? At University of Cincinnati, 40,000 students, which is an amazing thing. And in a school that has a huge diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds and race, and actually it's very international now. It's really interesting group of kids. And they're thinking of just, Betsy, can you lay out just how you're thinking about year one? Is everything is integrated all the time, but year one is really looking at yourself, right? To know yourself, which comes up in all the competencies and so basic that you don't know how to lead unless you have your own sense of your values. What are the other ones, Betsy?
That's all being figured out, Kate, because that's what the conversation that we had last week. Yeah. What should be the order? We had a really good podcast also with Doug Conant, who was also in the imprint, who was former CEO of Campbell Soup.
Yes.
And he just got to know Warren in the later stage of Warren's life, like the last couple of years, but he's also part of the imprint, right? Well, his whole work is on self-knowledge. And so saying what's really different about a center like this would be to start off on this self-knowledge, because who really they touch on it maybe in programs, but not the depth.
Okay. Let me just mention two things. One is mastering the context is key before self-knowledge, because we got to understand the UN vote this week, right?
Yes.
98% of the countries in the world want a ceasefire in Israel.
Yes.
We got to understand that. We got to ask, why isn't it? We've got to understand the context. A.
Yes.
B. The entire faculty at Cincinnati has to go through a leadership course. They have to experience it. They have to go through that course. Betsy, maybe you should be teaching them, but they need to be taught. And I would argue that it be a biracial, by gender, mixed faculty to teach them about leadership.
Yes.
So that then they can share their own experiences, like I just did in this call. And they can know where the barriers are, where the blocks are, and where the students are going to get stuck.
I think you're so right. Oh my gosh, what a blind spot. I had never thought of that. But of course, you cannot have this be just the kids learning this if the teachers are not on board and don't know what the context is. You're absolutely right.
Right. And Kate, let me just say one other thing, because this has been on my mind a lot. The Harvard, Pennsylvania, and MIT presidents, and the other presidents who weren't named, but who are in the middle of all of this, should all be creating leadership councils that have faculty, staff. I want the people who sweep the floor and clean the toilets on this council, board members, donors, all the donors that are pulling money out, and students, maybe 15, 20 people at the most, to create a strategy for dialogue about the world conflict. Not just the Middle East, huge conflicts. The US is going to be worse than the Middle East soon with Trump and Biden. So anyway, every university should be doing that. So no president is standing there all alone. They stand there with this council, and board presidents stand with them, as well as head of the janitors union stands with them.
So I love it. I love that, Joan. Oh, I remember there's one other thing I saw in your stories. Humor.
Yes.
Right? The story about him wearing the race car thing. I vaguely remember seeing a picture of dad wearing a white race car outfit, which was different. It couldn't have been an underneath a suit. There was a
Yeah.
whole other thing with like a helmet. I don't know what he was using that
I
Yes,
for.
remember
that's
seeing
it.
that too.
Yeah.
Some,
And
yeah.
he used costumes all the time. But there's a great picture of him in Cincinnati he went into the marching band.
Ah,
Like, during the football games. He was so silly.
yeah.
He wore costumes a lot, and he was very, very, very playful. There was another question I had. You mentioned Tavistock. I knew he was in Bethel at the T groups, which was NTL, National Training. What is it?
National Training Labs evolved from Tavistock.
Got it. Okay. Because Tavistock was in England, right?
Yes.
In England. Okay. And did you ever go to Bethel? Were you ever there at?
Yes, I did. I went to Bethel. Dick Beckhart, one of your dad's colleagues, and I were advising David Rockefeller's daughter, Peggy Delaney, on an institute she was creating. And I went to Bethel. Dick had a house near there, and I was with him there, him and his wife. And oh, yeah, come on.
I met Peggy. I've met Peggy. Such a small world.
Yeah, need it now.
Joan, back just really quickly to the curriculum part. It's in the
Yeah.
very early stages because we can't really develop the curriculum until we talk to all of you. But they felt like they wanted to get some kind of a framework just to kind of get the conversation going. There was kind of 5 things we were looking at, but the first thing was the self-knowledge, the being, the self, the gifts that you have, your vision of yourself. Second thing, what makes Cincinnati unique is the doing, because they have the co-op.
Oh,
So kids have these jobs in their experience. And then what's amazing is these seniors already have jobs and they've been paid and have that experience. So the doing experience, the practice. And the third was the relating, the connecting others. So the stuff that you and Ken are both talking about,
right.
right? How to have conversations, how to ask questions, how to deal with conflict, dialogue. That's so Warren to the curiosity and willingness to ask the right questions, as Ken was saying to us. Context, number 4, the environment, understanding your environment. And then the last was learning. How do you continue to be a lifelong learner? And how
Great.
do you learn, right? And
Great
how
to
do you
add
take,
that. Great to add
right?
that. But I don't know, maybe you said it. Nailing it to the floor is crucial.
The action.
Realizing your intention through action is crucial. Otherwise, this is all fluffy bullshit.
Yes.
And that's the
Yes.
doing.
There's too
That's
much
the
of
doing.
that in academia.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Totally.
the doing for sure. And these students have it built into their curriculum. They have to get out there into the workplace.
Right.
That's right.
Oh my God. I just want to say you and Ken are 2 of the most interesting people I have ever, honestly. I'm just bowled over by both of you and thrilled to meet you and honored, really. I saw your name so many times over the years on books and stuff. And so it's so cool to meet you. And I look forward to developing a deeper relationship. And Joan, one of my favorite things about this whole experience is these students
Oh my God.
are so amazing. And what's so fabulous about it is you hear these students who've never met him, Warren,
Yeah.
read his books, are quoting him all the time. There's all these kids that want to be on the Warren Bennis Experience Advisory Team. These kids who put themselves through school, these kids that are so mature and but in love with Warren's teachings. As Kate said, I did the experience last year, so I was in Warren Bennis heaven. I felt like he was there with us.